Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Subculture. I'm Dave G, and joining me on the line today from lockdown is...
I'm Captain Planet.
Yeah, it's Harley Woods, everybody, and we've decided to get back into doing the weekly podcast for Subculture, which may actually sometimes be more than weekly, because it'll come down to like what's going on in the world of pop culture, basically, to when we do an episode, but we're at least going to do one a week, sometimes more than one a week, but you'll get alerts when everything goes up anyway, so you'll be able to see when the new episodes are up. And we thought today a big topic that I've been asked to write about over the last week has been this stoush that kind of started up with comments made by NBC Universal's chief, Jeff Shell, who was talking to the Wall Street Journal, and he made the comment, "The results for Trolls World Tour have exceeded our expectations and demonstrated the viability of PVOD. As soon as theaters reopen, we expect to release movies on both formats." Now, of course, a lot of people just kind of wrote that off as a kind of victory lap speech by Shell, because Trolls World Tour did go into the hundreds of millions of dollars just from being released online while everybody was in lockdown. The one person who didn't take that too lightly, though, was actually the president and CEO of AMC Cinemas in America, Adam Aron. Now, AMC, for people listening from outside of America, are the world's biggest cinema chain. Basically, Aron did not take too kindly to Universal's comments, and he had this to say in a letter to Universal. "This radical change by Universal to the business model that currently exists between our two companies represents nothing but a downside for us and is categorically unacceptable for AMC Entertainment. Accordingly, we want to be absolutely clear so that there is no ambiguity of any kind. AMC believes that with this proposed action to go to the home and theaters simultaneously, Universal is breaking the business model and dealings between our two companies." Now, he went on to say that from now on, AMC would no longer screen Universal's films, including Fast and the Furious and the new James Bond film, which are both due out early next year and late this year. So, as we can see, it's kind of really taken on a big war between the biggest cinema chain in the world and one of the biggest film distribution companies in the world. So, mate, I guess we'll throw it open for discussion. What do you think about this whole thing with streaming versus cinema that's going on at the moment?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of ways to look at it. I mean, I can understand why AMC are like, what the hell, man? You're trying to cut us out of the slice of the pie. But if you look at it, certain things are made for the big screen, and you want those on the big screen. Other stuff, like in days gone past, you had straight to video and then straight to DVD. I could potentially see straight to streaming as an option instead of, straight to DVD. So if you look at it that way, some things going there that just aren't going to do well at the cinema, sure, but then the blockbusters and all the big stuff has to go to the cinema. So look, releasing them on both platforms at the same time, though, I can understand why the cinema would be kind of peeved off, because in a sense it's already kind of hard to get people out.
Yep.
So, and now, as the world currently stands during the time of this, that's a bit tricky.
Yeah, like I can see both sides of the argument, because basically what Adam Aron is asking for is for the 90-day exclusive deal that happens at the moment for AMC. So when a movie comes out, like a big film comes out through Universal, it goes into cinemas, and there's a clause in the contract that says that the film won't go onto a streaming service or come out on DVD or Blu-ray for 90 days. Now that quite often gets stretched out. As we all know, as people who buy DVDs and buy Blu-rays, some movies don't come out on DVD or Blu-ray for ages after they're finished in the cinemas. Other times they seem to be out the day that they finish in the cinemas, which would really be 90 days, but some films last longer in the cinemas, of course. But I can kind of see this from from both points of view. But I think also I don't think Universal have really done their homework on this too much either, because they're basically basing this on the success of Trolls World Tour and the fact that it made as much money or more money as a streaming film than what the original made in cinemas in the same period of time. But I think you can't really compare that, because people were in lockdown. If anybody wanted to watch the movie, they had to watch it through a streaming service. And you also probably had a lot of parents out there who were like, I'm so sick of my kids right now, what do? I'll shove the new Trolls movie on. You can't really compare the two when they were both released under very different circumstances. And also, as somebody else pointed out to me, the original Trolls movie was one of those films that came out in the cinemas. Nobody really knew all that much about it and didn't go and see it straight away, but it kind of became a favorite with kids after a while. So, of course, a lot more people wanted to buy the sequel because by then they knew about the first film and had watched it. So there's so many factors in this. I think it was kind of a little bit premature for Universal to kind of make a comment like that.
Yeah, and also when you factor in a kid's film, sometimes there's a whole different set of, factors in there, whereas, parents aren't always that happy to spend money on something like that for kids, taking a bunch of kids to the cinema. It's a big outing. Sometimes it's hard to reel them in if they're going a bit excited and crazy. Giving them the option of doing it at home, that would probably overtake them seeing it at the cinema if it was released at the same time. Although, mind you, if I ran a cinema, it might be easier on the cleanup to not have the kids in there watching that.
I should also point out too that when they say that the Universal movies are going to go to a streaming platform, we're not talking about a platform like Netflix here either, where you pay $9.95 and you have unlimited access. They would basically put this on their own platform. You pay, I think, anywhere between $20 and $29.95, and you only get access to that one movie for 6 days. So it's basically like buying it on renting it from a DVD or Blu-ray library, rather than actually getting to keep a copy of the movie too. So it's...
How much was that?
$20 to $29.95. It'll be anywhere in between there. So...
Wow, so why not go to the cinema if you're going to pay that much and get the full experience?
It probably does work better if you've got a big family. Like if you're a mum and dad and you've got 3 kids or 4 kids, you would be up for over $100 to buy tickets to go see it at the cinema with that size family. So it probably works for them, but if you were just a couple who wants to go along and watch the new Trolls movie, then you probably might as well pay for the cinema experience.
Yeah.
So, I think that's the other thing that kind of has been forgotten in this as well, is that they're talking about the numbers that Trolls and also The Invisible Man made through streaming services in America, but it was this system where it's like at least $20 to purchase, and you only have it for 6 days. So yeah, it is a kind of weird streaming platform, and I think they're finding that it's working in America, but also at the same time, we should point out that Trolls did not get that release here in Australia, did not get that release for most of Asia, and those countries and continents have actually decided to hold on to the film and show it at a later date.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's a really small audience you're playing with there. So, yeah, before making any grandiose plans, I'd really test things out a bit more and try not to make enemies on the way.
Yeah, exactly. So, and, I can kind of see the point, though, with what you said before, because here in Australia, I think we have a very different kind of cinema setup than what a lot of other countries do, in that we have the big three cinema chains in Village, Roadshow, Hoyts, and if you're in any of the northern states, Event Cinemas, and they basically take all the blockbusters. But then we have other independent cinemas like Cinema Nova here in Melbourne, or Palace Cinemas, which are Australia-wide. They normally take more of the art house kind of films. So in America, you do get a lot of films that kind of go by the wayside, because anything that we would kind of consider art house here in Australia seems to go to streaming in America. So I can kind of see why Universal would want to put those kind of movies up onto a streaming platform, so that people who like art house films but don't live near an art house cinema still have that access to those movies. But I think they would have to lower the price for those films as well, like down to about the same.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I think they're asking way too much for a short-term view, and most people are just going to watch it the once, not multiple times in the 6 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems. Yeah, sure. If it's something they know isn't going to make its money at the cinema type thing, or it's not going to have room compared to all the big blockbuster war, sure, that makes sense to just put it straight to streaming, which is the same as, straight to video.
Yeah.
Kind of release.
Yeah.
So, sure, why not? I don't think there would be any argument against that.
And I have to admit that while we've been in lockdown, I have been absolutely raiding JB at the moment, because they've put a lot of the movies that have come out in the last 12 months that have gone straight to DVD, they've put them down for like $5. And on the days that they've had 20% off, you've been able to actually go and get those movies, and they've cost $4. So I've been watching a stack of them. And look, there's some pretty good stuff that goes straight to DVD in Australia. So,
oh man, don't tell me this. I'm barely holding on to my money as it is.
So, but yeah, like there are some great movies that end up that way. And I guess the other film that we can kind of look at the moment that this has kind of happened to during the lockdown is Extraction, the Hemsworth movie, which was supposed to get a cinema release, but because everybody was in lockdown, they decided to bring it out through Netflix. And I think the one thing I took from that movie was I really liked it, but I think I would have loved to have seen it up on the big screen, because it was such an action-driven film that I'm kind of lucky that I've got a huge TV to watch it on, but I couldn't imagine somebody like watching that film on their mobile phone or on their laptop and getting the same feeling from that film as what they would have got if they were watching it in a cinema.
Yeah, could you imagine? That would be just terrible.
Yeah. I guess the other question I want to ask too is, and we could kind of play devil's advocate here, I guess, if we want, but do you think this whole COVID lockdown is going to affect the way people go to cinemas once this is all over? Because I'm kind of reading between the lines with what Universal are trying to say, and I think they're trying to say that once lockdown is over, people have now realized that it's so much easier to watch a movie at home through a streaming service than it is to go out. Do you think that cinema's numbers are going to be impacted by this?
Well, it could be, but at the same time, I think, people will jump onto something when it starts.
Yeah.
So when it comes to doing these things, they might jump onto it, so there might be an impact to the cinemas at the start, but eventually they're going to be like, this is rubbish. I can't watch this action-packed blockbuster on a tiny screen. I should be seeing that, full surround sound, I want 3D, I want this or that, So there might be a dip, but then I think they'll kind of get that they're losing out.
Yeah.
And there'll always be someone who's kind of like wants to be a bit penny pinching and try to do it, if this is a cheaper option, they'll do it that way. But that might be, like you said, like the family market or whatever.
Because I've had a few debates about what's going to happen with cinema, because I know a few people who work as film reviewers who are they're kind of like bit doomsday, and they kind of have been saying, oh, cinema's time is over kind of thing. But I think from what we've seen in the last couple of weeks, that's not the case. In Thailand, they thought that cinemas were going to be reopening last weekend. They ended up not reopening on the weekend, but at the same time, a lot of people rushed out and pre-ordered tickets to go and see movies that wouldn't have been big blockbusters. Like there was like a family movie with the guy who plays Archie from Riverdale coming out. That was like people were buying tickets for that online. Fantasy Island, which actually did come out here in America before lockdown. People were rushing out to buy tickets to that. We also saw a case in one of the states in America that went out of lockdown where people flocked to the local cinema only to find that the cinema owner had decided not to reopen yet because he didn't trust that the COVID numbers were down low enough, and people started to riot because they wanted to go in and watch movies. So I don't think it's going to impact cinema numbers as much as what a lot of people think, because I think those two cases alone kind of show that, yeah, people do want to get back out to cinemas.
Well, yeah, something I was going to say as well is that I noticed just in the past couple of weeks, the supermarkets went from being empty to having a full clientele in there.
Yeah.
So people are clearly just saying, screw this, I'm sick of being locked up in the house, let's just go out.
Exactly.
I think everyone's over it.
Yeah. And I think we've seen the same with public transport here in Melbourne as well. Like, this week's been kind of the first week that we've been opened up a little bit, and there's been news stories where trains are absolutely packed again and stuff like that. So, yeah, I don't know if people are going to take this whole social distancing thing all that seriously once the lockdown is over. I do know that one of the plans for Australian cinemas
it's just the crazies that take it seriously now.
Yeah. I know one of the plans for cinemas here in Australia is that they're going to limit the amount of people that go into every session, which was kind of happening the last 2 weeks of when cinemas were open. I went to see The Current War, which was the Michael Shannon, Tom Holland movie about the creation of electricity, and I was the only person in the cinema. Like, people were, by that time, starting to think that perhaps cinemas weren't a good idea. So we will go back to that point where you have to have a seat between you. I think that was the regulation back then, but we still don't have an actual date of when cinemas are going to open at the moment.
Well, I'd be happy with that. Just let me stretch out a bit. Let me have 3 seats, I'll lie across them.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm one of those people that, like, if I haven't seen a movie at a press screening, I normally end up going to see it at, like, 10 o'clock on the Thursday morning at the first session. So I'm kind of used to cinemas looking like that, because I always joke that, it's a private screening today, I'm the only person in the cinema, so that's not going to really impact much. Like, and it might actually mean that some people who put off going to the cinema will actually go more often as well. Like, I know a heap of people who absolutely hate the idea of going to watch a movie when it comes out in the cinema at a time during a peak time, because they don't want to have that distraction of the teenager in front of them checking Facebook and having the screen lit up by their mobile phone and stuff like that. So it may actually mean that more people that wouldn't normally go to a cinema will go at different times and things like that.
Yeah, I think so. I always like the idea of having my own private screening. I mean, the only good thing that's sort of come out of all this lockdown, as they call it, is, you know, I've had train carriages all to myself, and it's like, oh, look at this, it's like my limo. Yeah,
I have to admit, I caught a train just after the lockdown started, and it was when I probably shouldn't have watched it. The night before, I'd actually watched a science report on how long COVID could stay on a surface, and I got up to get off at my stop and realised this other dude was getting off at the same stop. So I kind of like did this Mexican standoff where it's like, you open the door, no, you touch the door, yo, you touch the door, where it's like, I can see that kind of stuff happening, like when stuff opens up again.
I've seen that as well. People stand up and then, you know, when there's like three people wanting to get off, they all kind of look, and it's just like, what the hell? So I just walk forward and open the door.
Oh, I guess so. Moving on from that, you've got a brand new segment that you want to talk to everybody about. Tell us about this new segment.
Yes, I say we call it Bring It Back. And we, you know, each episode we'll have a look at a bygone TV series that we think should come back. And we can talk about how and why it should come back.
Yep, and you're kicking it off. You're kicking it off with which show?
I'm going to talk about Sliders.
Awesome. So tell us, why should Sliders come back, and how can it come back?
Well, just in case people out there don't remember Sliders, it starred Jerry O'Connell and many others over the 5 or so years it ran. And it was about a group of people who travel to parallel Earths. So, you know, things might look the same, but something happened differently, where maybe one of them was never born, or one of them was a woman, or something else. So they get to experience these different lives. It's still planet Earth, but everything else could be different. So the original cast had Jerry O'Connell as the main protagonist of Quinn Mallory, who invented the sliding technology. And he was very keen to show this off to his professor. It was Professor Maximilian Arturo, played by John Rhys Davies, who some might recognize from lots and lots of films in a long career. And his best friend there was Wade Wells, played by Sabrina Lloyd. So they had planned to go on the first slide together, and inadvertently, a sort of has-been singer named Rembrandt Crying Man Brown, played by Clevin Derricks, was sort of picked up in the wake of it, just by accident. And then things went a bit crazy, and they could no longer control their sliding, so they would end up on random worlds or trying to get home for many, many years.
Yeah.
So, that out of the way, you'd see lots of familiar things return, familiar characters just done in a different way, that sort of thing. What would a character's life have been if they'd made a different decision, or if they'd taken a different course of study, you know, different things like that. And it's actually quite relevant now. I see a lot more shows now talking about the multiverse.
Yeah.
Look at the Marvel movies. They're talking about what happens if we alter time, then that creates a new parallel world where something different happened. So it's kind of getting more and more in the public conscience.
Yeah.
Consciousness. So I think it could be a good time to resurrect it. And actually, the very last season, I think the last season or two actually were picked up by the Sci-Fi Channel, because it was originally done by Universal, I think.
Yeah.
And so Sci-Fi bought the rights and kept it going. Because they didn't confirm they were doing the 5th season fast enough, they didn't get to book Jerry O'Connell and also Charlie O'Connell. His brother was playing his brother in the show as well during that 4th season. So because you lost half your cast right there, they had to bring in a couple of new people. And so the network actually thought, oh, look, we'll make the 18 episodes. We don't expect it's going to do well because we've lost 2 of the main characters. So we're not going to renew it for a 6th season. But it turns out it actually did really well, and they never thought to keep it going.
Yeah.
So, that's a little bit of unfortunate things in the history. But I think the way of modern storytelling does kind of suit it. Since shows like Buffy started, and you had that sort of ongoing character drama. We've built a whole new sort of way of telling stories now, and that would really suit the show. And it was actually what they wanted to do from the beginning, but Universal or whoever was making it initially hated that. They wanted it week to week. Don't worry about what happened before. Doesn't matter if it doesn't match type thing. And actually, if you're a fan of a show like this, you nitpick on all the details.
Yeah.
So, and this is something I think people would be more than happy to latch onto again. I mean, you remember the show, don't you? Did you?
Oh, I absolutely loved the show. But would you want to see it come back as with the same characters and the same actors, or a reboot? Because I remember when
I hate reboots. Yeah. For something like this, they can actually both could exist.
Yeah.
And I have had a bit of a think about it, whereas you could definitely bring back the characters who have been there previously. And there's a couple of little gaps and things where I think you could bring people back that you don't expect to come back, and there's certain ways of doing it. But also, it's parallel worlds. You can have alternate versions of people, you can have completely new characters as well. I think it's just building on that. If you have a strong starting cast, and it might, I think would actually probably be good to have a little bit of mix of the classic characters as well as some strong new characters, and then you can build from there.
Yeah, because I remember when Flatliners, the movie, got done a few years ago with the teenage cast, there was talk at that time that they may actually bring Sliders back with a all new kind of teenage cast, but actually go right back to the start, so it would be like the character creating it, and it's like all starting off. And I had to think at the time, I wasn't so big on that, except I actually thought they could have combined the two, in that perhaps there could have been a way where these teenagers do develop the system and they start doing it, but that's when they run into like Quinn and people like that. Like, they find these guys who have been doing it for years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the way it should be handled.
Yeah.
You can introduce, say, 2 new characters by doing it this way. And it'd be like, here's something I've invented, but when things go wrong, they run into a Quinn Mallory or someone.
Yeah.
And that picks up the old characters and sets it moving forward.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the shows where it would actually be quite easy to bring the original cast members back, because I know over the years, like it being at different conventions and stuff, and listening to different people talk from like the Buffy universe, the one thing that they've all kind of like said is that they would all kind of like to do it, but so many of them have got their own things. Like when I saw David Boreanaz at Supernova, and he said that, yeah, it would be awesome to bring back Buffy, but at the same time, he just committed to a new TV series. And the same thing, like Alison Hannigan, when I saw her talking about it, she was like, I'd love to be able to go back and do it, but I already have other projects that I'm working on. And you kind of like look at these shows and you think, for Buffy coming back, it would be brilliant for Nicholas Brendon, even for Sarah Michelle Gellar, because they don't have a lot going on, but there's always those cast members that have got a stack going on. But when you look at the cast of Sliders, they really are a cast where they haven't really been in other things that have really taken off, or like have been around for, or still going strong. So you could actually bring any of them back.
Yeah, I think you pretty much could. I mean, you know, maybe Jerry O'Connell would do more feature films, and you might have to, you know, lock it in around that sort of thing. The things you have to look out for is, you know, what's happened in the past. So I know Sabrina Lloyd, who played Wade in the first 3 or so seasons, had a bit of a falling out with the production and everything, because John Rhys Davies wasn't completely happy with how the series was going, so he wrote himself out. And then he was replaced by the character of Maggie Beckett, played by Cara Dewara, and she started getting all this stuff that was traditionally the Sabrina and Quinn kind of, the Wade and Quinn kind of story line. So I can understand that Sabrina Lloyd was quite peeved that her stories were getting given to someone else, and she was just sort of this background character who didn't have anything to do.
Yeah.
So in the end, they just fired her for complaining. They're pretty sure that's how it went down. I think there was quite a bit of animosity on set, so maybe they thought that was the easiest way out of it.
Yep.
But yeah, if they properly look at character and relationships and the story development, I think the two people they lost in the middle there would be willing to come back. I've seen on sort of documentaries and interviews that John Rhys-Davies loved his character of Professor Arturo, and he saw the potential of the show, but just hated how they didn't push it far enough.
Yeah.
And I think if you could get someone of his caliber back on board and let him have some input about take it further, I think you'd have really an all-star cast. I think everyone was great on the show.
Yeah. Have they talked about it at all at conventions? Like, have you heard whether or not any of the cast have actually talked about whether they would come back? Because, like you said there, the whole thing with Sabrina Lloyd, do you think she would come back if they pitched like a new Sliders to her?
Well, see, I don't know. I'm not sure if she's ever gone on record to say anything.
Yeah.
I just know it was really a crap situation. So whatever happened, yeah, there's always going to be something in the past there. So it would be something you'd really have to broach. But I think there is a lot of potential to bring that character back and sort of do it properly.
Yeah.
Because it is true, she was getting kind of sidelined at the end there. And it does seem a bit disappointing, a bit of a letdown if you've been following this character from the start, and then here's a new girl, we'll give her all the stuff.
Yeah.
And they're quite different characters.
Yeah.
So it did feel kind of wrong. I think they didn't know who they were writing for sometimes.
Yeah. Look, it is a show that I would definitely love to see come back, and it's one of those shows that, like, I've even got to the point sometimes where, like, I've gone back and revisited it, and I've actually, like, wanted to sit down and write, like, a pilot for, like, the reboot, and then, like, send it off to someone or something like that. Like, it has been one of those shows that for years and years I've wanted to see it. And this year would have been the perfect year for them to bring it back, because it was exactly, like, 20 years since, like, the last kind of thing. So it would have been a great year for them to have brought it back. But, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those shows, like, yeah, so many people have talked about bringing it back over the years, and it hasn't happened. But I kind of think that this is probably the right time for it, because in the past you've always had that thing where it's like, it's just been television network versus television network. But now with the streaming services in there as well, and like we've seen Lost in Space get brought back on Netflix and stuff like that, it would be interesting if one of the streaming services started screening it, what the reaction would be from a modern day audience as well, because we were talking off air before, and we said that Netflix screening Community from start to finish has revitalized the interest in Community. Like, the show has been rating really well. It'd be really interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to see what would happen if they put Sliders on, because it's one of those shows, if you go to Comic-Con or if you go to Supernova or somewhere like that, people still talk about it. Like, it's like Firefly in that essence, where it was a show that, going on television history, didn't last for that long. Like, 5 seasons is not a long time in television history, but it's a show that was so well loved by its fans that it automatically has that audience of those fans. But also, I know a lot of those fans have also showed the show to their kids, and their kids love it. So it's got that audience that would be ready-made if they wanted to bring it back.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I think people were so in love with the show when it started, and it still has a big following. And it really is the time for reminiscence now. Everything's being brought back to life on Netflix and things.
Yeah.
So if anyone at Netflix and Sci-Fi want to talk to us about bringing it back, we've got some plans. Talk to us. We know what we're doing.
Yeah. So I think a great way to end this segment is whoever's picked the show for that week, pretend right now that I'm a television executive. Pitch your pilot for the new show to me. Tell me which characters you're going to bring back and what they're doing. And tell me which new actors would you cast in the show if you had to.
Well, here's the thing. Because I'm actually quite keen and serious on this, I don't want to give away too much. Because I actually would like to pitch this.
Yeah.
But suffice to say, going on what I said before, I would introduce a couple of new characters to give it that fresh feel, so it's a new jumping on point.
Yep.
And then they would perhaps invent or come into contact with sliding technology, and crossing the dimensions, come into contact with some of the original cast. And so from there, over the course of the series, it would build up and finding the other characters and bringing them back together. I do know who I'd like to bring back, but I think I might give away too much. I would really like, actually, Professor Arturo to be one of the characters. And now, yes, he was killed off in this series, but again, it's parallel versions of Earth, so there are many Professor Arturos out there. And there's also a question as to whether or not the real one was killed. Dun, dun, dun. So, yeah, look, I think that would kind of be my way to go. Yeah. As for who to cast, I'm a little unsure about that, to be honest. I'd want to be really sure that we have a couple of people who, firstly, are interested and sort of believe in the project. Yeah. And kind of have their strong acting chops. Because it's got to be one of those shows with a lot of effects and green and stuff, so you want to believe they're seeing something that may not be there. Yeah. And also it's one of those shows, like, I guess Doctor Who was like that as well. Every kind of story is a vastly different situation, a different world, a different whatever. So someone who can sort of go through that, it's like being in a different play every week type thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've just been racking my brain, like, trying to think who I would cast if I had to, like, bring in two people. And, like, I keep on thinking, like, that there's... I think I would almost want to go for unknowns. Like, if there were two teenage characters, I'd want to go for two actors that kind of aren't big names, because otherwise I think you kind of have that issue with a show where people just watch it because a certain actor is in it. And I think that's one of the things I've loved about shows like Riverdale, is that they've actually gone with, like, a pretty fresh-faced cast. Like, when the first announcements came out about Riverdale, people were like, who the hell is this kid? Like, he's from New Zealand. Why is he playing Archie? The same with the 100. Them casting people like Eliza Cotter-Taylor from Australia kind of meant that people in America who'd been speculating who was going to play the lead role were kind of thrown right off kilter, because they cast someone that for a majority of the world hadn't kind of heard. The same with Pan Am, like the American television series that gave Margot Robbie her big break. When that show was being cast, a lot of people were saying, who is this girl? Like, who the hell is she? Why have they cast this Aussie girl to play this all-American princess kind of character? But so I think that kind of sometimes has a good thing about it, because it stops people from kind of like watching the show that just want to see what the Jonas Brothers are doing next. Like, it I think it actually
I
brings
agree.
harder fans to the show.
It's funny that you actually brought up Riverdale, because that's kind of where my brain first went to when you said who would I cast.
Yep.
Because there's actually some pretty good talent on there, and they're kind of at the right age. Like they're playing teenagers on there, but I think I'd actually go for someone that was just a little bit older, like be playing more like your university, college student type thing.
Yeah.
So, if you actually had Professor Arturo return, then it could be two of his students or one of his students and their friend or something. And I think that's where you get your young cast and part of your traditional Sliders cast in there. And I think it's a good way to kick off the story.
Yeah.
But seeing as though how all of those sort of characters or actors I like are kind of in those shows like Riverdale, makes it a bit hard.
Yeah.
But I like what you're saying with like kind of the unknowns, which is where a lot of these shows are kind of being cast from, and it looks, you're getting so much more quality. It's not just trying to sell someone who's famous for something.
Yeah.
And I think the quality of the performance and the storytelling overall is far more important than a recognizable name.
Definitely, yeah. Not to say that sometimes a recognizable name can't help, but like I kind of liked what they did with Big Bang Theory, where when you looked at the first season of Big Bang and who was in it, the only person that a lot of people would have recognized was Johnny Galecki. And that was because of stuff that he'd done years earlier. It wasn't like he was in a big show at the time. It was people remembered him from Roseanne and stuff like that. It's like, I like that. I love when they bring out a show, and I guess, like, for me, the great example of that was Jericho, a show that I absolutely fell in love with, and at the time, it's like, when they announced the cast for Jericho, people were like, why are you going back and casting this guy from the 80s? Like, and, yeah, now he's gone on from Jericho to be in Riverdale, and it's like, but at the time when they cast Jericho, people were like, why are you using this guy? Like, he's washed up and everything. So I think it's a bit harder to do that with teenagers, but I always do like that when they bring somebody in that kind of has that, I don't know what to call it, like that factor of, this is someone that...
It's the nostalgia factor again. We're bringing back a show out of nostalgia, so let's get some actors out of nostalgia to say, hey, and that's what, if you watch all the superhero shows now, this is what they are like.
Yeah.
Anything that's like based on Superman, you get actors who have played Superman or Supergirl or have been in a Superman show or movie playing guest roles.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Look, and I think like it's going to happen with the movies more and more. I think for Marvel especially, now they've lost Stan Lee. I was talking to a friend about this the other day. I think their cameos from now on are kind of going to be people from the past, like that have been a voice of a character or something like that. Like we were talking...
Well, I think they're actually still doing Stan Lee cameos.
Yeah.
Some of it will be stuff I guess they have filmed of him before, and some of it will just be sort of honorific, like pictures and stuff.
Yeah.
But there's still going to be these little bits and pieces in there. But I think some sort of report I heard suggested that they're going to try not to overdo it and have a special effects CG animated Stan Lee in every movie. And there's so much talent from Marvel where they should be bringing people like Jack Kirby, who helped create all these characters. Or I don't even know if he's still around. I hope he is. But there are people who are...
Otherwise, it's going to look very Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah, well, yeah, look, I'm keen for that. Put a bit of corpse, Look at that dead body there. I recognise him from 1976. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, that's something that I think they'll look at doing more and more of now is, bringing in some other cameos as well, like just to try and freshen it up, because I think almost in a way, I know this is moving off topic, but I think this lockdown and kind of like not having any movies out for a while, it's almost going to feel like a complete reset with Marvel as well. Like, because we have almost had a year now with no Marvel movie, which we probably needed, because I love my Marvel movies, but damn, there were a lot in the last couple of years. So
yeah, I have to say, I was sort of less satisfied watching the last few, just because I've been oversaturated, and I don't think the last two Avengers really stood well on their own. Like, it kind of seemed like one movie got all the humor, and then the next one got all the serious stuff, and it's like, you could have condensed that into one thing. I don't know. I have lots of niggling issues with those.
yeah.
But, yeah, by that point, the love has been a little bit lost, so I kind of like to take a little break from that and hope they kind of refresh and do something a bit different for the next few.
Yeah. So now we've moved right away from sliders, so we might as well go on to our next topic, which is our regular topic that we always look at. What have we been watching? So who should kick off? What are we watching?
You go for it.
Okay, so as I mentioned before, I've been actually watching a lot of these kind of like straight to DVD movies that have come out in Australia, and because we don't have video libraries anymore, it's actually a lot harder to watch them. Like when I was younger, we had video libraries. The straight to DVD movies was pretty much what I would go and borrow, because I'd already seen all of the blockbusters, and that gets harder these days because unless you've got one of the little kiosks near you, it gets a little bit harder. So two that I watched that I really, really recommend. The first one is In Darkness, starring Natalie Dormer from Game of Thrones. This movie, like, I don't know why this movie went straight to DVD in Australia, because it is such a good film. It's basically about this blind character who witnesses, and I'll do that in commas, witnesses a murder. And as the police start to investigate, all this stuff starts to unravel, including the fact that the girl who was murdered upstairs is actually the daughter of a Eastern European warlord who's wanted on war crimes. So it's absolutely brilliant, though. It is one of those movies, I have to admit, that I did predict the twist coming a lot earlier than it actually came out in the show. I won't give too much away, but I don't think that's going to be a problem for a lot of other people. The reason that I picked what the twist was because sounds so bad. I can't say it without giving it away. Basically, I have a relative who is in a similar boat kind of thing, and I picked it because I spent all my youth growing up around this relative. So I picked it in the movie as well. But yeah, but that having been said, it is a great little kind of like thriller. It's not really an action, it's more a suspense kind of thriller. The other movie I watched as well, and this was purely because I wanted to see if this movie was as bad as what reviews said. It's a movie called Future World, starring James Franco, Lucy Liu, and Mila Djokovic. Now, this is a movie that James Franco actually directed as well, and it kind of notoriously got released after being in America. It went straight to DVD here, because in America, it was one of the first movies to get a 0 rating on Rotten Tomatoes. That's how bad it was supposed to be, but I gotta say, I actually kind of enjoyed it. Like, now, I don't know whether James Franco meant for this movie to kind of parody post-apocalyptic movies from the 80s, but that's how I viewed it. So I was kind of more apologetic with some of the acting, because I thought they were trying to mirror like a lot of the 1980s kind of post-apocalyptic exploitation movies. So if they weren't, then it was just bad acting. But if it wasn't, then, and they were trying to mimic it, I actually thought it worked pretty well. It's one of those movies where there's not a hell of a lot of story. It's basically about a teenager whose mother is dying in a post-apocalyptic world. He needs to go off and find medication for her. In doing so, he comes across a warlord played by James Franco and a drug lord played by Mila Djokovic. There's lots of other like cameos in there from James Franco's friends, so like a few rappers and people like that kind of turn up as well. Snoop Dogg, I think, is probably the one in here where I think it kind of gives away that he's trying to mimic other characters, because he's playing such a cliched kind of pimp character that you would hope that it's a kind of mimicking those pimps that we would have seen in black exploitation movies in the 1980s. But hey, look, if you don't mind sitting down and watching a supposed bad film, something like Barbed Wire or something like that, then yeah, definitely give Future World a bit of a go. It's worth it for a bit of a laugh.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those quirky things, and I think you get more willing to watch different things when you're stuck at home and
yeah.
you just get through a series and it's like, oh, what can I watch now? What can I watch now?
So what have you been watching?
Yeah, so here I am kind of racking my brains. I kind of have my regular things, like when they're showing like Riverdale, which we already mentioned. I just love that show. At some point, there's going to be a point, there's got to come a time in Riverdale where there's not a murder or a mystery or a psychopath or something.
I think when we get to the end of this season, you and I will probably do an episode where we kind of look back over Riverdale and go into a deep discussion about it as well, because I think this season's kind of thrown up a few things for me that I'd really like to discuss on an episode.
Yeah, it actually is worth it, because it's becoming a bit self-referential and stuff now. They're making little comments about as if they were like fans watching the show type thing, and pointing out how can there be so many, crazy things happening in this town. And there was a comment in one of the last episodes saying like, all these people are being barred from going to the prom or whatever, and the only people left to go who haven't been barred so far are Archie and Jughead, I think. And they're like, bring on the fan fiction.
Yeah.
Because there's all this fan fiction out there just being written about these two characters hooking up.
And I don't know whether it's because, like, for us here in Australia with Netflix, we've had huge gaps between the episodes recently that you kind of start to notice more, but I found it really weird in I think it was the last episode or the one before, where there's a weird obscure video shop in Riverdale, where it has a back section that has like snuff films and stuff, but the front section has like all these cult movies and weird obscure films. Now, if anybody in Riverdale was going to know about that shop, it should have been Jughead. But he seemed to have no awareness that the video store existed, and it's one of those ones where you're like, did somebody write this episode that doesn't know these characters? Because Jughead is a kid who, from the very start, has referenced Lovecraft, he's referenced Lynch, Hitchcock. It's like, if anyone knew about that video library, it was going to be him. And if you remember back to the first season, he was a huge movie buff. Like, that was the whole reason why he was at the drive-in, like, and was living at the drive-in, because he was a movie buff. It's like, but he doesn't know about this video library that exists, like, in his town.
But at the same time, I think it was based on the fact that everything in the library is VHS. So he's grown up in a world where VHS has kind of been phased out, and then when he was homeless, he was like living in the actual cinema. So, if he wanted to watch something, he'd probably use the projector and do it sneakily that way. So I can kind of understand why he might not know about a VHS store, or even if he did know about it, it wouldn't have been much use to him. But at the same time, I don't know, he's kind of been living in the low socioeconomic end of the scale, so you'd almost kind of pick someone like him living off an old VCR rather than a DVD or a Blu-ray player. So, I don't know. Yeah, it is a bit funny.
And I'm pretty sure that we've seen an episode before where him and Betty were watching a movie at one of their homes on reel-to-reel. So, Yeah, like I'm pretty sure that he actually picks me as the kind of kid that would still go out and get VHSs. Like, he picks me as the kind of kid that would be like rummaging through secondhand sales, like looking for that copy of Reanimator on VHS. Like, I don't know. It just it felt like a different writer has come on board or something, or that the writers have got to that point where they're like, oh, people aren't going to remember this kind of thing. Like, I remember people raised it with Buffy when there was an episode and someone mentioned an airport, and it was like, there's never been an airport mentioned before in Sunnydale. Like, how big is Sunnydale that it's got an airport? Like, it's kind of getting to that point with Riverdale. It's like my imagination of Riverdale was that it's a pretty small kind of town, like, but all of a sudden there's these things popping up that, like, that people don't know is there, kind of thing. And I remember I saw an interview with Jeff Schwan, who created One Tree Hill, and he said that's the one thing that he kept all the time with One Tree Hill was, even though he had the whole of Wilmington to film in, he was very aware of the fact that One Tree Hill as a town was supposed to be a lot smaller than Wilmington. So he used to, like, basically base everything that these kids grew up with on one suburb of Wilmington, so that he didn't have that thing about where people are suddenly like, oh, wow, there's a 90,000 seat stadium that no one's ever talked about before in One Tree Hill. So, yeah, like, so, yeah, I don't know.
Just some of the things like, well, actually, Riverdale in the past has done this well, and they go to neighboring towns for that stuff, which is kind of, they wouldn't necessarily know the full details about.
Yeah.
Like, you have Sabrina, the Teenage Witch, you know, that's set in the same universe, but in a different town. So they kind of mention each other every now and then, but the two have never crossed over, and I'm still waiting for that to happen.
And they mentioned really Greendale in the last episode, too. I don't know if you noticed that.
They mentioned which, sorry?
They mentioned Greendale, and I'm like, oh, cool, is there going to be a community spin-off?
Well, no, I think Greendale is where Sabrina lives, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. So maybe there is a community college there somewhere, so yeah.
Yeah, but I would love that crossover as well. Come on, Netflix, make it happen.
Yeah, so apart from Riverdale, what else have you been watching?
Yeah, I sort of try to catch the DC sort of superhero shows, so Batwoman, Flash, and Legends of Tomorrow have been putting episodes out again. Otherwise, I actually bought a few DVDs a while ago and didn't really have a chance to watch them, but I have started watching them, and they're really old movies.
Yeah.
So one of them was like old black and white, actually. Let me tell you, it's called Remember the Night, starring Fred McMurray and Barbara Stanwyck. Now, Fred McMurray, for those who might know their stuff, was the dad in My Three Sons, and he was the original star, you know, of the first Flubber movie.
Yep.
So, that sort of thing. And The Shaggy Dog. Remember those movies?
Yes, yep.
So really, really old school, but I don't know, I just love those old black and white movies, so it really appealed to me. So, he's basically a lawyer or a solicitor or something. So it starts in court. So he's been told to, get this girl locked up. She was caught stealing this necklace or some sort of jewelry. And she's a bit of a down and outer, and she is just like horrified that she's going to be spending a Christmas and you know, the next few days in a jail cell, and he's like, he just wants to get out of there so he can go home to his mother and aunt and whatever and have his Christmas out in Whoop Whoop. So he just kind of, you know, stalls it so that it has to be recalled, you know, after Christmas. And so she's like, oh, I'm going to be stuck here all Christmas because of this. Why couldn't we just, like, you know, reach a resolution type thing? And, but of course he, you know, he looks kind of smug and doesn't give it away, but he goes to, like, the bail bondsman afterwards and says, yeah, you know, get her bail paid and, make sure she returns after. However, the bondman misunderstands his intention, and he gets the girl free and takes her around to Fred McMurray's character's apartment. And it's like, well, hang on, you can't stay here. I'm going off to Christmas. And then it turns out that they both grew up in sort of neighbouring towns. So he decides to drive her there to see her mother, while he goes and sees his mother. But there's a very bad relationship between the woman and her mother. So, yeah, he ends up bringing her to his family for Christmas. And, it sort of develops this romance and stuff like that. So, it starts to raise that question of, okay, he's supposed to be trying to get her put in jail and pay for her crime, but now he's starting to develop feelings for her. Yeah, so it's an interesting little situation, and I think it works out quite well in the end.
Yeah.
From my point of view, whereas it doesn't go too la-di-da in Hollywood and whatever. So, yeah, I think it's one worth watching. Remember the Night. So, yes, a very old one.
Definitely. So,
and there was something else I started watching, like a real obscure thing. It's called The Phantom Empire. And it starred, like, a country music singer, I think he is, Gene Autry.
Yep.
So it's a quite unusual piece. It was done back in the days of those cinema serials. So you go back each week for the next installment.
Okay.
So I haven't gotten all the way to the end yet, but I think there was like 12 episodes or something like that. And so basically, Gene Autry plays Gene Autry. Because they figured, we don't think he's a really good actor, but we think he'll, bring people in. So let's just have him play Gene Autry. and they literally just sort of say that in some of the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting thing. So back at that time, it was like 1935 actually. So at the time, they love to do the kind of sci-fi things, and they're kind of just verging into that territory. I think it was becoming popular to do something a little bit out of this world. But Gene Autry runs this radio show from this like cattle ranch type place, and the only way they can keep on that land is if they continue to produce this show at a certain time every day. And of course some guys come along who are looking for traces of this lost ancient civilization called Nu or something. And so they figure there's evidence there, but they need to get rid of, everyone on this farm so that they can buy it out and take it over and, do their archaeological digs in secret and everything. And, yeah, so things kind of go a bit haywire, and we start to see these, almost alien-seeming knights from Mu. And, yeah, you go into this underground world, which is very sci-fi, and these crazy, weird-looking robots and things like that. But, yeah, with your little musical interludes here and there. But it's an interesting story. It goes on for a bit.
Yeah. So sounds like one to check out. So that's 4 movies there that for everybody who's in lockdown at the moment that you should all go and check out, and bit of a variety there as well. So I guess that kind of leads to the end of this episode of Subculture, the podcast. Unless there's anything else you want to talk about before we finish up, mate?
I think we've kept them hanging on long enough.
Definitely.
We'll save for the next episode.
Yeah. So like we said, we're hoping that we're going to be able to do episodes a little bit more regularly now. We'll aim for 1 a week. Sometimes there might be a few more. Like we've already got some kind of timely topics that we want to talk about, and while we're in lockdown, it seems like a pretty easy way to record some more at the moment. So we might be back sooner than 1 week. Otherwise, yeah, we'll be back next week. For now, though, I've been Dave G.
And I'm Quinn Mallory.
And we'll be back soon with another episode of Subculture, the podcast.
Bye.